And so the idea that if the Chinese think that they can move beyond economics as the basis for power, they really do have nothing left. I mean, the Chinese ethnicity, the Han, have been there for over 3,000 years, but they've only been able to be a united entity that is relatively secure in their borders for about 10% of that time, and half of that is under the American-led order. So if we remove economics from the equation, this ends a lot faster. Also, let's assume for the moment that China just wanted to displace us and use more or less our management system. They don't have the naval forces to get past the first island chain, much less secure the Persian Gulf energy routes. And let's assume that they could. Do you really think that, like the United States, they're going to fight wars in the Middle East so that their allies can access oil? No, that oil would be for them. So the guns and butter trade that we made with the world, they are not capable of doing. He knows that either the Americans will leave, in which case the basis of Chinese power collapses, or the Americans won't, and they will become hostile to China, in which case the basis for Chinese power collapses. And in that sort of environment, being able to define the narrative becomes critical. Because in an authoritarian, a dictatorial system is really what they are now, a fascist dictatorial system, the only way you can maintain power is if the people choose to let you. I didn't worry about a war in Taiwan until very recently. The Chinese didn't have the naval capacity. Even if they did, they couldn't operate the the semiconductor fab facilities. They were too advanced. The technology that actually makes TSMC run is from the United States. It requires American designs. And then they're still 5,000 miles from their energy source. Made no sense. Made, past tense. If the financial and the demographic and the trade and the agricultural system are all facing threat at the same time, there's something to be said about choosing the time and the place of the fight and writing the narrative. It will come at the cost of a modern industrialized economy, and agriculture is an industrialized sector. But I think Xi's position is, if I can maintain power for the low price of only 500 million dead Chinese, that's worth it. So now I kind of give a Taiwan invasion like a 1 in 3 chance.
So if the Chinese fall, who steps in?
That's a great question. Chinese history is replete with the Han Chinese not being able to hold the center. And it's replete with examples of how it all could go to hell in a very short period of time. If I was a betting man, I would guess that the North China Plain, which is home to about 2/3 of the Chinese and the vast supermajority of the Han Chinese, I would guess that would kind of become its own political entity and kind of fall into a neo-Maoist tyranny, complete with all the cultural revolution connotations that come from that. And I would further guess that the city-states from Shanghai down to Hong Kong, city-states that traditionally have gotten the majority of their food not from mainland Asia, will integrate into some sort of extra-national supply system, whether in the past, this was the United States, this was Britain, this was France, this was even Australia. And they basically throw in their lot with somebody who can keep them alive. Now, of course, the road from here to there, messy, because there's nothing about the Cultural Revolution that was fun for anybody. They haven't released sex data with the new decade census yet, so we really don't know that picture, but we can project, because in the January 2000 data, there was a sex imbalance of 5 to 20%, province by province, 5 being the low, 20 being the high. So they probably have about, according to that data, about 95 million more men aged 40 and under than women. The supposition with the new census data is they probably overcounted the women by about 20 to 25%. So we're just talking a massive surplus of men over women, which is part of the reasons why we're looking at such a fast population collapse. Now, I'm familiar with the argument that if you've got all these extra men and there just aren't enough women locally and there's not enough women in any of the bordering countries to make up the difference, that it might make sense to throw them at someone. I've always found that argument a little dubious. The Russians made it very clear in the 1990s that if there was a land war with China, that the Russians would not try to meet them with tanks and men, they would just nuke. So Siberia's off. Kazakhstan, what does the winner get? Not a big gain there. You can't go southwest into India because of the Himalayas. That leaves Vietnam. And when the Chinese last did that in 1979, the Vietnamese treated them with the same gentle welcoming that they treated us. So, you know, that's recent memory for the Chinese. There's nowhere to go. I mean, if they could make a land bridge by holding hands to get to Taipei, maybe, but no. So this is an internal security threat, not an external one. And, you know, there's all kinds of studies that have been done about what happens when you have literally tens of millions of extra frustrated men that can't do anything in your system. That is a system killer. This is a mix of everything. So in the case of Turkey specifically, yes, it's a developing country, but it's a country with a long cultural history. They have very few problems from my point of view in maintaining social control. Sure, they've got a Kurdish issue in their southeast, but if anything, that unifies the Turks rather than divides them. In addition, they control any trade systems on land or in water between the two lobes of Eurasia, giving them immense influence. And if you look at all the countries on the periphery, they're not ones that can stand to the Turks. If anything, they want to be cooperative with the Turks. So they've got all the energy they need within arm's reach. Their agricultural system is self-sufficient. Their agricultural input system is self-sufficient. And courtesy of on-again, off-again cooperation with the Europeans, their manufacturing system is nearly as good as Mexico's. So they're a country in a post-globalized world that can stand on their own and expand their writ. That's my view of it. No problem.
We have time for one more question. Anybody in the room have another question? All right, sir. Online question related to your previous comments. Do you see the Russia-Chinese alliance as any sort of threat or an ability for them to overcome their demographic or economic problems?
If the United States decided that it wanted to continue its role as the guarantor of global order, it would be. Because here you've got two major poles of power who are willing to put aside their many, many differences in order to resist America's sphere of influence. That's the wrong phrase. American rules on how the world should work. You remove the Americans from the equation, though, and these are security and economic competitors. Their population centers are a convenient 7,000 miles apart. They are not capable of functional cooperation once you remove the United States and its kind of overarching reach. Remember that these are countries that have fought a number of wars in the past. They only officially settled their border disputes about 10 years ago. And anything that we know about countries that are in population decline is that their security policies become very brittle because they can't sustain a conflict for any duration of time. They don't have the replacement population to do it. So I am far more concerned about these two countries falling to blows and what that might lead to than I am about them having any sort of long-term functional alliance.